Emperor Nicholas II attached paramount importance to the issues of public education. As D.L. Saprykin notes, the era of Nicholas II was a time of absolutely unprecedented in the history of our country attention to educational issues on the part of the state. It was during this period that the existing school network was built and the organizational and material conditions for the implementation of universal education were created. Education, as well as science and technology, was a real priority of Nicholas II's policy. Already in 1895, the Tsar pointed out to Minister I.D. Delyunov the need for a qualitative improvement of secondary school and the insufficient development of literacy among the population. However, the planned reform of public education from the first days was hampered by unrest among university students. N.P. Bogolipov, at that time the rector of Moscow University, wrote in a report for 1891 to 1892, "You know what a pathetic sight the majority of those who now graduate from the gymnasium are. These are people with distorted moral concepts, with a complete lack of knowledge. These are future public figures, imbued to such an extent with anti-social aspirations that they represent some kind of completely uncultured society. Our professors are in most cases more officials than mentors and youth leaders." On December 29, 1897, the Minister of Public Education I.D. Delyunov died. Shortly before his death, he met with the Tsar and named Professor N.P. Bogolipov as his possible successor. On February 28, 1898, Nicholas II appointed him Minister of Public Education, warning, "Do not expect to see the imminent fruits of your activities. Our life is so insignificant and so short compared to the life of an entire state that every statesman in his short life can do very little. Nevertheless, it is necessary to make every effort for the common good." In 1899, the Tsar approved two interdepartmental commissions. The first to develop the principles of secondary school reform, N.P. Bogolipov Commission, and the second to study the problems of higher education, P.S. Vanovsky Commission. Emperor Nicholas II formulated the basic principles of the reform of education in rescripts in the name of P.S. Vanovsky and G.E. Zenger. D.L. Saprykin names the following principles of this reform: the need for a radical revision and correction of the educational system, overcoming the alienation of the school from the family, the integrity of education, not only mental, but also moral, strengthening physical education, multiplication of vocational educational institutions, primary, secondary, higher, wide development of technical education. The national character of education. According to the plan of the sovereign, the school was to not only and not so much prepare for higher education, but also give a complete education. A national program for the introduction of universal primary education was developed separately. The Tsar wrote in his diary that day, "Muravyov came and told me that some scoundrel had fired a revolver at Bogolipov and wounded him seriously in the neck. On March 2, 1901, N.P. Bogolipov died of his wound. On March 4, 1901, riots broke out with renewed vigor near the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg. A crowd of several thousand people attacked mounted policemen, throwing heavy objects, stones and garbage at them. One of the officers was seriously wounded. During the dispersal of the demonstration, 2 officers, 20 policemen and 4 Cossacks were wounded. On March 21, 1901, the Tsar signed a rescript addressed to Adjutant General P.S. Vanovsky, in which he pointed out, "The experience of recent years has indicated, however, such significant shortcomings of our educational system that I recognize it as a matter of grace to immediately begin its radical revision and correction. Parents and families who are most closely obliged to take care of their children, and then the time will soon come when I and with me all the people will see with pride and consolation in the younger generation the firm and faithful hope of the fatherland and its steadfast support in the future." In another rescript, addressed to the manager of the Ministry of Public Education, G.E. Zeter, the Emperor explained his vision of the future school. "First of all, I confirm my demand that in school with the education of young people be combined in the spirit of faith, devotion to the throne and the fatherland, and respect for the family, as well as care that with the mental and physical development of young people, they should be accustomed from an early age to order and discipline. Nicholas II indicated how he sees the future structure of the school. I wish that it should be of 3 sections. A lower one with a completed course of education, a secondary school with a completed education, and a secondary school with a preparatory education for the university. Nicholas II considered the reform of public education to be the most important thing, designed for many years. He wrote to Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, "I am aware of the need to redo our entire educational system. We have certainly lived to see, hand on heart, that the present state of school cannot continue and that we must therefore embark on a path of firm and decisive transformation. The fruits of it we will see not now, but 10 or 12 years from now." Often, I have talked about this with poor Bogolipa. The appointment of a new Minister of Public Education was not an easy task for the sovereign. On March 7, 1901, he wrote to his mother, "The most important question now is who to choose to replace poor Bogolipa. But I sadly have to admit that I don't have a single candidate right now. This question haunts me, because it is in the present moment that such a person is terribly needed, and where to find him." In the absence of a better candidate, Nicholas II appointed Adjutant General P.S. Vanovsky as the new Minister of Public Education. First of all, the Provisional Rules on Student Organizations were issued, allowing their creation under the control of the university administration and professors. The Tsar was opposed to the opening of new universities, as he believed that there were already enough of them in Russia. On February 9, 1902, Nicholas II pointed out, "I believe that Russia needs to open higher specialized educational institutions, and even more in secondary technical and agricultural schools, but from it there are quite enough existing universities. To adopt this resolution as my guiding order. Instead of universities, Nicholas II ordered the opening of polytechnic institutes. In 1897 they were opened in St. Petersburg, Kiev and Warsaw. With the highest consent, they were given the name of Emperor Nicholas II. How much importance Nicholas II attached to the education reform can be seen from his letter to his mother. What I do, I feel in conscience what I am obliged to do for Russia." Nicholas II understood that a properly delivered public education was the main guarantee of the defeat of revolutionary ideology. P.S. Vanovsky clearly could not cope with this task. "You know, dear Mama," the Tsar wrote of Vanovsky to Maria Feodorovna on March 21, 1902, "my feelings and my opinion of the good old man. But I ask myself, has his appointment as a minister improved the cause of our education? No, unfortunately not at all." On April 6, 1902, Nicholas II dismissed P.S. Vanovsky, and appointed G.E. Zenger as a minister. In a rescript in his name, written by the Tsar himself, the main emphasis was placed on the responsibility of the teaching staff in ensuring order in the universities. Nicholas II wrote, "I expect from the educational administration and professors a cordial and prudent participation in the spiritual world of the youth entrusted to their care. The riots that disgrace science and universities, which in the past Russia was justly proud of and destroying so many young lives dear to the fatherland and me, must come to an end for the benefit of the people entrusted to me by God." The Tsar was convinced that teachers should include people who are mentally mature and morally healthy. In 1903, the Ministry of Public Education opposed the exemption from military service of teachers of public schools, since otherwise the teaching staff will be replenished with immature, inexperienced, physically and morally promiscuous young men. The Tsar fully agreed with this and wrote a resolution. This has always been, and now, my opinion. On the program of the Special Commission for the Reorganization of the System of Public Education, the Emperor outlined, "I hope that serious attention will also be paid to strengthening the religious and moral education of our youth." However, in this case, Nicholas II soon faced the same problem as in other spheres of state activity, the lack of the right people. This shortage of personnel led to a slowdown in all the reforms outlined by the Tsar, and made some simply impossible. Thus, Nicholas II was very sympathetic to the idea of universal education and did a lot for it. Since 1908, initial education has become compulsory. In fact, by the time of the Revolution of 1917, at least 86% of Russian youth could read and write. But the people's teacher, for the most part, still remained an enemy of the existing system. The realization of this fact was the resolution of Nicholas II on the Zemstvio proposal of 1903 to introduce universal education from 1909, and how to cope with the necessary number of reliable teachers when introducing universal education. The beginning of the restructuring of public education was accompanied by measures to appease students. For them, a legal gathering was allowed. The punishments of those who participated in the unrest were mitigated. Many of them were returned to the normal social life of universities. But, nevertheless, the government failed to completely expel the dark alley end to science force from the walls of higher educational institutions. The events of 1905 fully confirmed this. During the reign of Nicholas II, the situation with education radically changed, becoming truly popular. By the beginning of the First World War, the Russian Empire had one of the most progressive, open to all social strata of society, systems of secondary and higher education. Despite the difficulties, science in universities successfully developed, new scientific schools arose. The emperor attached great importance to women's education. On the report of the Tula governor on the desirability of greater involvement of girls in public schools, he put a note: "I completely agree with this. This is a matter of the utmost importance." In 1897, the Higher Women's Medical Institute was opened in St. Petersburg, and women's courses were opened in Moscow. The Tsar wrote on the report of the trustee of the Moscow Educational District: "Those who wish should not be refused. Let Russian women study in Russia." In 1904, the Ministry of Public Education began to develop a project for universal education, which was to be introduced within 10 years throughout the country. The Revolution of 1905 greatly hindered this project. By 1915–1916, the reform of public education, interrupted by turmoil and wars of reign, reached its final stage. Under the leadership of the Minister of Public Education P.N. Ignatiev, a harmonious system of public education was created. As D.L. Saprykhin writes, a graduate of the Tsarist gymnasium usually had a level of knowledge in humanitarian subjects, languages, historical and philological, philosophical disciplines, law, which was not achieved by graduates of the relevant Soviet universities. Under Nicholas II, primary education was free. Since 1918, it was planned to begin the introduction of compulsory free secondary education. It is a pity that the extent of the reforms undertaken by the last Tsar Nicholas II is still unknown to most people who still believe the lies of Bolshevik propaganda.